The Virginia sun slumped heavy across the Blackwood Range, its orange haze clinging to the gravel like smoke after a battle. Dust rose in lazy spirals with each gust of wind, carrying the faint echo of taps from Arlington just a few miles away. The range wasn't just a shooting ground, it felt like a confessional, a place where old ghosts came to test their weight. Rob Callahan knelt at lane 4, his sweat-soaked army tee clinging to a frame hardened by years of service but worn down by nights without sleep. At 32, he carried himself like a man who had lived twice as long. His brown hair, streaked by sun, hung damp over a forehead furrowed with tension. In his hands rested the Barrett M82A1, a weapon that seemed almost too large for his shaking grip. The rifle's bipod dug into the shooting mat, anchoring itself into the earth, while Rob's hands betrayed a tremor that ran from wrist to trigger. Each shot cracked into the air, thunder rolling downrange, only to sink uselessly into the berm. Though steel ping, no relief, just silence answering him back. The laughter from younger shooters carried over the range, sharp, mocking echoes that stung more than the recoil. They called him a washed-up vet, a ghost chaser who couldn't steady his own hands. Rob ignored them, though his jaw tightened. He wasn't here for them. He was here to outrun the memories of Fallujah. The blast that took his spotter, the shouts that cut off mid-sentence, the ringing that never stopped. From the shack porch, Megan Ortiz leaned on the rail, her flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows, eyes narrowed against the glare. At 45, she carried the kind of steadiness that came from both war and peace. Texas drawl, calm presence, but with an edge that demanded respect. She had run Blackwood Range like a front porch for years, fair rules, cold beer, and quiet space for soldiers who fought themselves more than targets. Watching Rob, she saw the tremor and recognized it instantly. She had worn the same look once. "Take a breath, Callahan," she called, her voice cutting the air just enough to reach him. "That Barrett's eating your brass and you're feeding it frustration. Step back and breathe." Rob barely lifted his eyes. "I'm good, Meg. One more string." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying him more than the shake in his hands. Then came the sound of boots on gravel. Slow, steady, unhurried. A figure emerged from the shimmer of heat, tall and broad-shouldered, his olive-drab jacket hanging loose over worn jeans. Jack Harland, 38, carried himself with the quiet of a man who had stood post at the tomb of the unknown soldier through nights of rain, holidays, and endless silence. His polished boots clicked with a rhythm that spoke of discipline rather than pride. A faded badge on his shoulder caught the dying light, a mark of the old guard, earned without fanfare. Megan smirked. "Well, look who marches in like the apocalypse is running late. What brings you out, Harlan?" "Borrow a lane if you've got one," Jack said, his voice steady, low, unshaken. "Maybe that spare M82 if Callahan here isn't married to it." "Lane 5's zeroed," Megan replied. "Just don't turn my berm into a sieve." Jack set his duffel down with the ease of habit, pulling out a worn yellow notepad filled with careful wind calls and ballistic notes. Without a word, he moved beside Rob, watching him fire another round into silence. Then at last, Jack spoke, his tone calm enough to split through the tension like a clean edge. "You breathing with the rifle?" he asked. "Or fighting the recoil?" Rob let out a bitter snort. "What recoil is honest on a 50? "Breathe into it," Jack said. "In through the nose. Hold for the picture. Out slow on the brake. Sync with your heartbeat." Rob stared at him, half amused, half irritated. "Palace boy giving lessons now? You guarding tombs or teaching yoga?" Jack didn't flinch. "Try it once." Rob settled back onto the stock, drew in a breath as instructed, and let it out with the trigger squeeze. The rifle thundered. Then, faint but undeniable, a steel plate rang downrange. A ping, not a thud. Rob blinked, almost startled. His lips twitched, half smile, half disbelief. For the first time all day, he had struck true. Jack only nodded. "Good sync. Now your stance. Are you anchored into the wind or floating like a mirage at 2,000? And in that quiet exchange, under the fading sun, the mocking voices behind them lost their weight. For the first time in years, Rob felt like the rifle might forgive him. The steel plate still hummed faintly, a ghostly echo that Rob Callahan wanted to trap in his chest and never let go. For a moment, he wasn't the man who missed. He wasn't the veteran choking on memories. He was just a soldier who had made his mark. But the quiet didn't last. From the benches under the shade, a group of younger shooters erupted in laughter, their voices sharp and mocking. They weren't strangers, National Guard kids, barely mid-20s, full of bravado and fresh tattoos, uniforms still smelling of laundry starch. Among them, Derek Flash Riley stood out, all swagger and cocky grin, his mirrored aviators reflecting the dusty range like he owned it. Flash was 26, wiry but muscular, his energy wired tight as a coiled spring. He slapped his knee and hollered, his voice slicing through the air. "Hell, Callahan! 1 hit in 50? Tomb Boy's holding your hand now? What's next? He wipe your nose for you." The laughter doubled, cruel and hollow. Rob froze, the heat of embarrassment climbing his neck. He clenched his jaw, fighting the old urge to swing, to shut them all up with fists instead of words. His hands hovered over the Barrett, itching. Jack Harland didn't flinch. He simply stood, boots clicking softly against the gravel as he turned toward the hecklers. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a calm that cut deeper. "Range rule," Jack said evenly, voice carrying without needing to shout. "Respect the shooter. You break that, you break discipline. You boys want to laugh, you take it out on steel. Put your rounds where your mouth is." Flash pushed up his aviators, smirking. "Discipline? We're not guarding headstones, old man. We're here to shoot." Megan Ortiz straightened from the porch, her tone sharp as barbed wire. "You're here because I let you be. This is my range, and you don't mouth off to men who've bled more dust than you've walked on." For a moment, silence cracked across the lanes. Then Flash shrugged with a grin, raising his rifle, a sleek custom AR-10, matte black with polished optics. He gestured toward Jack, voice dripping with challenge. "All right then, Tomb Guard, let's settle it. Your steady hands versus mine. Longest shot wins. 1 round, 1 plate. Loser packs up and shuts up." The crowd stirred, whispers flickering like sparks. It was bravado, sure, but it carried weight. A duel of skill. Pride was at stake. Rob glanced at Jack, expecting him to wave it off. But Jack only adjusted the cuff of his olive jacket, calm as stone. He met Flash's smirk with a level stare, his words simple, measured. "Distance?" Flash's grin widened. 2,000 yards. Steel plate at the ridge. Even Megan raised her brows. "That ridge hasn't been touched in months. Crosswind eats bullets for breakfast up there." Jack nodded once. 2,000 it is. He didn't brag. He didn't sneer. He simply walked back to his lane, setting the Barrett on its bipod with the precision of ritual. His yellow notepad lay open, numbers scribbled neat and exact. He scanned the wind flags, the shimmering mirage, the rhythm of the earth itself. Flash strutted to the line, his AR resting light in his arms, confidence radiating off him. His buddies slapped his back, hyping him up. To them, it wasn't just a shot. It was a chance to humiliate the quiet sentinel who refused to rise to their taunts. Rob stood off to the side, heart pounding. He knew what this meant. If Jack missed, the laughter would never end. If Jack hit, maybe the mocking would finally quiet. The range fell into silence, the kind that stretched tight, electric, like the pause before a storm. Flash dropped prone, adjusting his scope, finger curling over the trigger. His breath was shallow, cocky. "Watch and learn, Tomb Guard." The crack of his shot tore the air, echoing downrange. All eyes strained on the ridge. No sound came back, no ping, just silence. Flash cursed under his breath, forcing a grin as though it didn't matter. Fluke. Then Jack Harland lay down beside the Barrett, his body moving as if molded to the earth. He breathed slow, steady, sinking ribcage with heartbeat with trigger. The world seemed to shrink until it was only him, the scope, and the steel plate waiting far beyond the shimmer. 1 shot. The Barrett thundered. A heartbeat later, the faintest, sweetest ring drifted across the air. Steel. A clean hit. The range erupted, not with laughter, but with silence thick enough to choke. Even the wind seemed to pause as though giving respect. Jack rose smoothly, dusting his jacket sleeve. He said nothing, didn't even glance at Flash. He simply packed his notepad back into the duffel, and in that silence, the mocking was dead. Flash Riley's grin faltered, but he forced it back on like a mask, shrugging at his buddies as if the silence meant nothing. They tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle, cracking under the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. A Tomb Guard, with a single cold-bore shot, had done what their brash confidence couldn't. Rob Callahan stood rooted, the sound of steel still ringing in his chest. It wasn't just the hit, it was the ease of it. Jack Harland had lain down, breathed once, and sent the round across 2,000 yards like it was routine. No strain, no boast, just pure, quiet certainty. Megan Ortiz leaned on the porch rail, her sharp eyes locked on Flash. 2,000 yards chewed you up, boy. Maybe keep your mouth shut until you can back it up. Flash spat into the dirt, his jaw tight. Wind shifted, but no one bought it. Jack didn't even glance at him. He was already folding the Barrett back into its case, each movement deliberate, neat, unhurried, the kind of care that belonged to men who carried rituals heavier than themselves. Rob found himself stepping closer. His voice, when it came, was low, almost reverent. How do you do it? You didn't even warm up the barrel." Jack looked up, his blue eyes steady but not cold. "Discipline, breath, respect for the shot. That's all it is." He paused, closing the latch on the case. "The rifle doesn't care about nerves or ghosts. Only about what you give it in that moment." The words dug deep, more than advice. They were a lifeline. Rob swallowed hard, the tremor in his hands betraying him. What if the ghosts won't let go? For the first time, Jack's gaze softened. He set the case down, rested a hand briefly on Rob's shoulder. Solid, grounding. Then you don't fight them. You breathe with them. Let them ride the wind, not the trigger. Rob blinked, throat tight, and for once the weight of Fallujah didn't crush him. It was still there, yes, but quieter, like the edge of a storm instead of the center. From the benches, the younger soldiers had fallen silent, their bravado wilted. One of them muttered, "Man, that was clean." But no one dared say it loud enough for Flash to hear. Megan clapped her hands, breaking the tension. "All right, show's over. You boys came to shoot, not to gossip. Lanes are open. Steele's waiting." The rhythm of gunfire slowly picked up again, but the mood had shifted. Where once laughter had cut Rob down, now eyes lingered on Jack Harland with a mix of awe and unease. Even silence, it seemed, could carry more weight than noise. Jack packed his notepad, slung the duffel over his shoulder, and gave Rob a small nod. "Keep at it. The Steele will teach you if you listen." Rob wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in his throat. He simply nodded back, clutching the Barrett like it was more than a weapon, like it was a bridge back to himself. As Jack walked away, the echo of that single shot lingered in Rob's mind. Not thunder, not triumph, just silence made sharp like a blade. And for the first time in years, Rob thought maybe silence didn't have to mean failure. Maybe it could mean something worth guarding. The evening wore on, but the sound of Jack Harland's shot still lingered over the range like a ghost. Rob Callahan sat at his bench, the Barrett heavy across his lap, his mind circling the same question over and over. How could one man make silence louder than a storm? Megan Ortiz dismissed the younger soldiers soon after. Their cocky energy had dissolved into something smaller, quieter. Flash Riley was the last to pack his rifle, each motion sharp and angry. He avoided Jack's departing figure, but the bitterness in his clenched jaw made a promise. He wouldn't forget. Rob stayed behind, unsure why. Maybe he feared going home to another night of empty walls and restless sleep. Maybe he just needed to breathe in the dust and oil until the tremors slowed. He set the Barrett back on its bipod, squinting downrange. The steel plates gleamed faintly in the fading light, some scarred with pockmarks, others untouched. Rob tried to steady himself, but the memories pressed close. Fallujah, smoke, the echo of his spotter's last breath. His hand trembled, and the crosshairs danced. A voice broke the spiral. "Calm even. You're gripping too hard." Rob blinked, looking up. Jack Harland stood at his side again. He hadn't left after all. His duffel rested by his boots, not slung across his shoulder. Rob exhaled shakily. "Thought you were gone." Jack shook his head. "Not yet. You weren't finished." For a long moment, they said nothing. Jack adjusted Rob's shoulder, nudged his elbow, eased his cheek onto the stock. The corrections were small but steadying, like ballast keeping a ship from tipping. "Breath with it," Jack murmured. "Not against it. Inhale, exhale, then let it break on its own." "Don't force it," Rob followed. In, out, the crosshairs slowed. The tremor didn't vanish, but it softened, absorbed by rhythm instead of panic. The trigger broke. The Barrett roared, ping. The sound wasn't perfect, it wasn't center steel, but it was there. Clean enough to echo. Rob lowered the rifle, chest heaving. For the first time in years, he felt a crack in the weight pressing on him. Not release, not yet, but possibility. Jack gave the faintest nod. "See? You're not fighting it. You're listening." The moment was fragile but real. Rob clung to it like a lifeline. Behind them, Megan called out from the porch. "We're closing up in 20. Don't make me drag you both out." Jack smirked faintly, the kind of expression that flickered and vanished in a breath. "We'll be done." As Rob packed the Barrett into its case, his hand still shook, but softer, quieter, almost manageable. He glanced at Jack, hesitant. "Why help me? You don't even know me." Jack's eyes stayed on the horizon, where the last light bled across the ridge. His voice was low, measured, because silence doesn't belong to the ghosts. It belongs to the living who carry them. Rob didn't know what to say. The words pressed heavy, not like a burden, but like a truth he had almost forgotten. As the sun dipped, the two men stood side by side in the cooling dust. No more shots were fired. No more words were needed. Only silence, no longer empty but full. The range lay empty the next morning, quiet except for the low hum of cicadas and the occasional clink of brass being swept into buckets. Rob Callahan returned anyway, Barrett case in hand, a stubborn knot in his chest. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, Fallujah crept back in, smoke curling through alleys. His spotter's voice cut short, but the echo of steel from last night had been louder than the ghosts, if only for a moment. He wanted that echo again. When he arrived, Megan Ortiz was already there, clipboard in hand, logging maintenance checks. She raised a brow at him. "Back so soon, Callahan." Rob shifted his grip on the heavy case, figured I owed the steel another round. Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "Steel doesn't care about debt. Only truth. You ready for that?" He swallowed hard, not answering. From the far bench, a familiar figure stirred. Jack Harland sat with his duffel beside him, already unzipping the Barrett's twin case. He looked up, his calm gaze meeting Rob's, as if he had been expecting him. Rob blinked. You came back too?" Jack nodded once. "Discipline is repetition. One shot doesn't teach enough." They sat up side by side, the weight of the rifles grounding them both. Rob's hand shook as he loaded the magazine, but Jack's presence steadied the rhythm. There was no lecture this time, no correction, just the quiet solidarity of two men listening to the same silence. When Rob broke the first trigger, the shot rang out, followed by the faint ping of steel. Not perfect, not clean, but a hit. He exhaled, chest loosening. Jack adjusted his scope, his movements fluid. His shot followed, another clean strike that carried across the air like a drumbeat. Together their fire became a rhythm, ping, pause, ping, steady, unhurried, almost ritualistic. But the piece cracked. From behind the line, Flash Riley's voice cut through, raw with lingering bitterness. "What is this, a duet? Tombguard and Ghost Boy having choir practice?" Rob stiffened. He hadn't seen Flash approach, but there he was, AR slung across his chest, aviators hiding eyes that burned with bruised pride. A couple of his buddies trailed him, less cocky than before but still circling like hyenas. Megan's tone was sharp. "Riley, you're on thin ice. Don't push it." Flash ignored her, stepping closer. "Nah, I'm just here to watch. See how many pity lessons the old guard dishes out before Callahan cracks again." Rob's throat tightened, the tremor in his hand threatening to return. But Jack's voice came steady beside him, a low anchor. "Ignore the noise." Steel doesn't hear him. Rob gritted his teeth, lined up again. His shot rang out. Ping Flash scoffed, but something in his grin faltered. He hadn't expected that Jack's turn. He fired, and the steel sang again. The rhythm held. Megan stepped forward, planting herself between the shooters and the hecklers. "If you can't respect the range, Riley, you don't shoot here. Last warning." The tension hung heavy. Flash shifted, frustration simmering under his skin. He finally backed off, muttering curses, his boots grinding gravel as he stalked away. Rob lowered the Barrett, sweat beading his brow. He turned to Jack, voice rough. "How do you stay so damn steady? Doesn't he get under your skin?" Jack closed the bolt with quiet finality. "Noise only lives if you let it. Silence is the stronger guard." Rob didn't fully understand, not yet. But when he looked down range at the steel, scarred but standing, he thought maybe he was starting to. The sun dipped lower across Blackwood Range, painting the gravel lanes in molten amber. The air shimmered with heat still rising from the ground, though shadows had begun to creep across the ridges. Rob Callahan wiped sweat from his temple, his breath ragged but steadier than it had been in weeks. Each shot he took now hummed with rhythm, a faint music in steel and silence. Jack Harland knelt beside him, his notes scratched carefully in that neat soldier's script. Every few minutes he'd murmur wind calls, subtle corrections, nothing more. Rob followed, and each correction brought another satisfying ping. It felt like progress, until the rumble of tires broke it apart. Two lifted F-150s rolled in, their engines loud as challenge horns. A pack of young men spilled out, multicam pants, tight shirts, holsters shining. Their laughter rang too sharp for the still evening. At their head strode Sergeant Mike Flash Riley, jaw squared, grin wide, aviators reflecting the setting sun. Meg, he called, voice carrying. Lanes for the big dogs. $2,000 on the table. Time to show the locals how it's done. Megan Ortiz folded her arms from the shack porch. Lanes 3 through 6. Brass downrange, keep it civil. Always civil, Flash replied, though the smirk on his lips said otherwise. The crew spread like wolves, unpacking rifles, checking optics. Their energy was restless, cocky. Flash's gaze drifted down the line and caught Rob. His grin widened. Heard you were hot once, Callahan. Thought you'd be walking plates by now. What happened? Ghosts slow you down? Rob stiffened, the weight of the Barrett suddenly heavier. Something like that, he muttered. Flash's men snickered, one of them adding, Guess some folks brought home more than stories. The words stung. But before Rob could retort, Jack's calm voice slid between them like a shield. Steel doesn't care for talk. Only shots. Flash noticed him then, eyes narrowing on the faded badge at Jack's shoulder. His grin turned mocking. Well, boys, look at that. Royalty. Parade guard himself, come to salute the targets. He stiff-marched in parody, his men laughing. Jack said nothing. He simply settled into prone, adjusted for wind, and pulled the trigger. Crack. A clean ping answered from 1,900 meters. The silence that followed cut sharper than any insult. Flash's grin faltered, but he covered it quickly. Here to shoot, huh? Fine, we'll make it interesting. $2,000 says my crew outshoots your best. Rob's pulse kicked up, ghosts pressing at the edges again. Jack leaned close, voice steady and private. Ignore noise. Read the wind. One breath at a time. The contest began. Flash's men fired in rapid succession, some pings, some misses. They hooted at every hit, jeered at every thud. Rob waited, shouldering the Barrett, but the laughter clawed at him. His hand trembled, sweat slicking the grip. Jack's whisper anchored him again. You want a spot? Rob glanced at him, nodded. Yeah, why not? Jack read the wind without a device, just flags, dust, the tug of air on his cheek. 2 o'clock, 5 knots. Half MOA, right? Light as a sigh. Rob adjusted, fired. Crack. Thud. Low. Wind lied a hair, Jack said calmly. Now veering 4, correct, Rob corrected. Fired again, crack, ping. The steel sang clean. His chest eased. Flash glanced over, his smirk twitching. Not bad, vet. Keep it up, maybe you'll break 1,000 without the shakes. One of his buddies chuckled darkly. Not with that PTSD finger, Rob froze. The words tore open old wounds, his breath sharp, his vision narrowing. But Jack's hand pressed lightly to his shoulder, steady. Easy, they bark at shadows. You shoot your line. Rob inhaled, exhaled. He fired again. Ping. Then again. Ping. 3 of 5. Flash's crew missed as the breeze shifted. Someone cursed their app. Jack didn't look up from his notes. Wind doesn't care about apps. The sun bled into the ridges. Flash's grin thinned, pride itching at him. He stood, raising his voice for all to hear. 2,000 meters. Last round, decider. Who's got it? Callahan, you in or tapping out? Rob's chest tightened, but his voice came firm. I'm in. He went prone, locked the bipod, sighted through the scope. Jack's voice guided him, steady as heartbeat. 6 knots cross, spindrift pulling right. Quarter hold left. You have this. Rob breathed in, sight quivering in the shimmer. Laughter swelled behind him. He squeezed too soon. Crack, thud. Wide left. The jeers erupted. Flash crowed. Ghost got you. Figures. Rob rolled to his knees, shame burning hot in his chest. But Jack's hand pressed again, steady. Wind lied. You'll read it next time. Then Flash's voice cut in. Your turn, Palace Boy, cold bore. $2,000 says you miss. Beers if you hit. The range fell silent. Megan's voice carried warning. Range is closing soon. But Jack's calm words floated above the tension. If I hit, you apologize to Callahan. Mean it. Flash's grin tightened. Deal. Jack took the Barrett from Rob with quiet respect. Appreciate the loan. He went prone, breath settling. The flags stilled. Dust spun lazy. The moment stretched thin. Then crack, silence. Seconds dragged, ping clear, pure. A bell ringing across the hills. The range held its breath. Flash swallowed hard, shame cutting through his grin. Respect, man. Sorry, Callahan. Didn't mean it like that. Rob shook his hand, the tremor quiet for the first time. Jack said nothing more, only shouldered his duffel, walking steady into the dusk. Night fell quick in the Blackwood Range. The heat bled away, replaced by a chill that crawled down collars and into bones. A pale moon rose over the ridgeline, silvering the gravel and throwing long shadows across the empty lanes. The crowd had thinned. Flash Riley's crew packed up earlier than usual, quieter than when they had arrived. Their laughter had dimmed to awkward jokes, then silence. They drove off in dust and taillights, leaving only Rob, Jack, and Megan. Rob sat on a bench near the shack, Barrett resting across his knees. His hands traced the worn steel, not trembling tonight. His mind kept replaying the moment, the shot, the ping, the stunned silence. It wasn't his finger that had done it, but something in him shifted anyway. For the first time since Afghanistan, the voices in his head weren't shouting. They were listening. Jack leaned against the railing, scribbling notes by flashlight. Calm, deliberate, like nothing unusual had happened. His blue eyes flicked up, met Rob's, and held steady. "Better win tomorrow." "You'll like it," Rob chuckled low, almost disbelieving. "You make it sound like a weather report." Jack's mouth quirked. "That's all it ever is. Win's just another voice. You learn which ones lie." Megan came out carrying 3 bottles of water. She handed them over, sitting cross-legged on the steps. Her dark hair caught moonlight, her eyes sharp. "You know Flash will be back." "Boys like that don't take losing well." Jack shrugged, capping his notebook. "That's his problem. My student's problem is distance. 2,000 clean. Tomorrow we start again." Rob glanced at him, then at Megan. "Why? Why help me at all? You don't even know me." Jack looked out at the dark lanes, his face unreadable. "I know what it feels like to stand guard over ghosts." "That's enough." Silence stretched between them, filled only by crickets and the occasional pop of cooling steel. Rob's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Afghanistan. The ambush, the flash of light, the ringing in his ears, the man whose face he never forgot. His chest tightened, but then he looked at Jack, steady as stone, and the panic eased. "I almost quit," Rob admitted softly. "I thought I'd never steady my hands again. But tonight, I felt it, like the rifle and I weren't at war anymore." "That's the start," Jack said. His voice carried no judgment, only fact. Megan's gaze softened. "Tomorrow you show yourself it wasn't luck." The night deepened. They packed slowly, each movement unhurried, ritualistic. The steel target swayed faintly in the wind, still echoing with the memory of that last perfect shot. When they finally locked up, Rob looked back once more at the empty lanes. He swore he could still hear the bell of steel, ringing not as judgment, but as promise. Dawn bled slowly over Blackwood Range, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery gold. Mist clung to the ridges curling low along the gravel lanes, softening the edges of steel targets that waited like silent judges. The world felt hushed, as if it knew the end of something hung in the air. Rob Callahan stood at lane 3, Barrett resting across the bipod. His face was tired but steady, his green eyes clear. The ghosts still lingered in the corners of his vision, but they no longer screamed. They simply watched. Jack Harland crouched beside him, his notebook open but hardly used. His corrections had grown fewer with each day. Rob was reading the wind himself now. Megan stood on the porch, arms crossed, sipping black coffee, her sharp gaze softer than usual. Engines rumbled. Dust rose. Flash Riley and his crew returned, swagger dimmed but not gone. They carried rifles. Laughter forced, pride bruised but burning. Flash pulled his aviators down, scanning the range. "Morning, Palace Boy. Morning, Ghost. Ready to make it official?" Jack didn't look up. It was official last night, but Rob spoke before the tension thickened. "I'll take the shot. 2,000 meters, cold bore. Winner walks, no talk." The words surprised even him, but once said, they felt right. Flash's grin sharpened. "You? Thought you'd choke again." Rob settled prone, cheek pressed to stock, eyes narrowing through glass. The wind tugged at flags, light and fickle. He breathed deep, the mist cool in his lungs. For once, his hands were still. Jack's voice was barely a whisper. 3 knots left to right. Hold a hair left. Trust it, Rob exhaled. His finger tightened. Crack. Silence. The world seemed to stop. Then, ping. Clean. Pure. The sound echoed across the ridges like a bell in a cathedral. Flash's jaw clenched, his crew shifting awkwardly. No jeers now, just silence. He nodded once, grudging. Fair. Respect. He holstered his pride, motioned his men, and left without another word. The dust from their trucks faded into the rising sun. Rob lowered the Barrett, his chest rising slow, steady. He looked at Jack, who closed his notebook without writing a word. "Not my shot," Rob said quietly. "Not anymore." Jack's mouth quirked the faintest smile. No, yours. Megan lifted her coffee in a silent toast. About damn time. The three of them stood there as morning spread across the range. Steel targets swayed faintly in the breeze, but the echoes of the last shot lingered, not as ghosts, but as promise. Rob knew the war inside him wasn't over, but he also knew, for the first time in years, he wasn't fighting it alone, and that was enough.